Stop embarrassing the family and learn from your brother, my mom snapped. I put my glass down and said, fine, he can cover the mortgage from now on. Mom went silent, then whispered, what mortgage? The house is paid off. Right. Everyone froze when I pulled out the bank statements. I, 34M, sat at the head of the dining table in what used to be Dad's chair, watching my family tear into the prime rib I'd paid for. Again, the crystal glasses caught the chandelier light, the same chandelier I'd had rewired last year after Mom complained it flickered. Nobody mentioned that either. My older brother held court at the other end, describing his latest consulting gig in Silicon Valley. Everyone hung on his words like he was delivering the Sermon on the Mount. Mom beamed at him with that special pride she reserved exclusively for her golden child. My younger sister laughed at all his jokes, even the ones that weren't funny. I pushed my food around my plate and took another sip of the expensive scotch I'd brought. Nobody else was drinking it. They were all on the wine, the good bottles from the cellar Dad had built. The cellar I now maintained and restocked. Mom turned to me with that particular expression I'd learned to dread, the one that meant she was about to say something that would stick in my chest for days. She asked why I couldn't be more like my brother, why I insisted on embarrassing the family with my little business ventures when I could have a respectable career. The scotch suddenly tasted like copper in my mouth. My brother's consulting firm did well, she continued. He had connections, influence, respect. Meanwhile, I was still running my small construction company, getting my hands dirty, barely scraping by according to her assessment. I set down my fork carefully. I asked her what she meant by barely scraping by. She waved her hand dismissively. Everyone knew construction was a dying industry, she said. I should have gone into tech or finance like my brother. Instead, I chose to work with my hands like common labor. It reflected poorly on the family, especially at her book club. My sister jumped in then, agreeing that I could do better. Her husband nodded along. Even though the man had been unemployed for 6 months, and I'd quietly paid for their car repair last month so my sister wouldn't stress during her pregnancy. I took another long drink and felt something inside me finally snap. Not dramatically. More like a cable that had been fraying for years finally giving up its last thread. I told them that was fine. My brother was clearly the successful one, the capable one, the one they were all so proud of. So he should have no problem taking over the mortgage payments starting next month. The table went quiet. My brother's smile faltered. Mom's face shifted through several expressions before landing on confused concern. She said there was no mortgage. Dad had paid off the house years ago. Everyone knew that. I reached into my jacket pocket, the same jacket I'd worn to 3 refinancing meetings and 4 contractor negotiations in the past month, and pulled out a folder I'd prepared that morning. I'd known this moment was coming eventually. I just thought I'd have the strength to keep my mouth shut for a few more holidays. I laid the first bank statement on the table between the serving dishes. The house had been paid off, I confirmed. Dad had managed that 2 years before the cancer took him. But Mom wanted to renovate the kitchen 3 months after the funeral. Then she wanted the master bathroom redone. Then the roof needed replacing. Then my sister needed help with her wedding because her fiancé's family wasn't contributing enough, and we couldn't have people thinking we were cheap. I spread out more papers. Credit card statements. Loan documents. Payment schedules. Mom had come to me each time with tears in her eyes, telling me Dad would have wanted the house maintained properly. That Dad would have wanted his daughter to have a beautiful wedding. That Dad would have been ashamed if we let the family home fall into disrepair. So I'd taken out a mortgage. Then another. Then I'd used the construction company's line of credit when the banks stopped approving loans against the property. My brother's face had gone pale. He asked why I never said anything. I looked at him directly for the first time in months. I told him I had. Multiple times. I'd asked for help with Mom's expenses. I'd suggested we all sit down and create a budget for house maintenance. I'd mentioned that carrying the property costs alone was straining my business. He'd always had the same response. He was too busy with his important work, flying between San Francisco and New York, closing deals worth millions. Surely I could handle some basic family obligations. My sister protested that she didn't know. Nobody told her it was this bad. I slid another statement toward her. It was the payment confirmation for her car repair. Below it was the receipt for her daughter's birthday party last month. The one at the expensive venue because Mom insisted her granddaughter deserved the best. Below that were the grocery receipts from the past year. I'd been covering Mom's food costs for 18 months because her pension didn't stretch as far as she claimed. Mom's hands were shaking as she picked up the papers. She said I should have told her. She never would have asked if she'd known I was struggling. That word, struggling, nearly made me laugh. I wasn't struggling. My construction company was actually doing well. We'd landed 3 major contracts this year, and I'd had to hire additional crews. The problem wasn't my income. The problem was that my income was supporting 5 adults instead of 1. I pointed to the bottom line on the mortgage statement. The monthly payment was more than my brother probably spent on his car lease. Multiply that by the other loans, the credit cards, the continuous, small favors that added up to thousands every month. My brother-in-law had the grace to look ashamed. He asked if that number was real. I confirmed it was. And I asked if he wanted to see the spreadsheet I'd been maintaining for the past 4 years, tracking every expense I'd covered for this family. Every dinner like this one where I paid for the food everyone ate. Every holiday gift exchange where I bought presents for everyone because Mom said it was tradition. Every emergency that somehow only I was available to solve financially. My brother found his voice again. He said he would have helped if he'd known it was this serious. He had money. He could write a check right now. I told him I didn't want his check. Not anymore. I was done being the family's silent ATM while being lectured about embarrassing everyone with my blue-collar career. Mom started crying. She said she never meant to be a burden. Dad would be so disappointed with how this family had fallen apart. Something in my chest twisted at that. Dad wouldn't be disappointed in the family falling apart. He'd be furious that they'd treated me like this. Dad had been a carpenter. He'd built half the custom features in this house with his own hands. He'd taught me everything about construction, about taking pride in physical work, about the dignity of building things that lasted. And these people had spent 4 years implying I was less than because I followed in his footsteps instead of chasing white-collar prestige. I stood up from the table. I told them the next mortgage payment was due in 3 weeks. They could figure out among themselves how to cover it. The house was in Mom's name. I'd made sure of that when I took out the loans, thinking I was protecting the family asset. So technically, it was her problem now. My sister asked what I meant. Was I just abandoning Mom? I explained that I wasn't abandoning anyone. I was simply establishing the same boundaries they'd all enjoyed for years. My brother had his important career that was too demanding for family obligations. My sister had her growing family that needed her attention. They'd all made their choices about what they could and couldn't contribute. Now I was making mine. I'd continue running my embarrassing little construction company. I'd continue getting my hands dirty with common labor. But I wouldn't continue funding a lifestyle for people who saw me as a disappointment and a checkbook in equal measure. Mom asked what she was supposed to do. She couldn't afford the mortgage on her pension. I told her she had 2 options. She could sell the house and move somewhere affordable, or she could accept financial help from her successful son in Silicon Valley and her son-in-law once he found employment again. I was sure between the 3 of them, they could figure something out. My brother stood up then, his face flushed. He said I was being unreasonable. This was family. You don't just walk away from family over money. I asked him if he remembered last Thanksgiving. I'd mentioned potentially buying a small condo for myself, something with lower overhead than the apartment I was renting. He'd laughed and said I should focus on being smarter with my money instead of making impulsive purchases. I'd been living in a 1-bedroom apartment with used furniture while paying the mortgage on a 4-bedroom house I didn't live in. But that was being impulsive. The silence that followed was deafening. I picked up my jacket and the folder of documents. I told them I'd email them copies of everything. They'd have full transparency on exactly what the financial situation was. What they did with that information was up to them. Mom called after me as I walked toward the door. She said we needed to talk about this properly. We were all adults. We could work something out. I turned back one last time. I told her I'd been trying to talk about it properly for 4 years. Every conversation ended with me being told to stop complaining, to step up, to stop embarrassing the family. So I'd stopped talking and started documenting instead. The folder I'd left on the table contained more than just bank statements. It had copies of every text message where I'd asked for help, every email where I'd tried to discuss the family finances, every conversation I'd attempted to have that got shut down or dismissed. I told them to read it all. Really read it. Then we could talk. I left without waiting for a response. Update 1. The fallout started within hours. My phone blew up with texts and calls that I ignored while I drove home. When I finally checked the messages, They ranged from my sister's tearful voicemails to my brother's angry demands that I call him back immediately. I didn't call anyone back that night. Instead, I sat in my small apartment with a beer and actually relaxed for the first time in months. The weight I'd been carrying felt lighter, even though I knew the real complications were just beginning. The next morning, my brother showed up at my construction site. I was reviewing plans with my foreman when his luxury sedan pulled up in a cloud of dust that made my crew look over with raised eyebrows. He got out wearing a suit that probably cost more than my truck payment and picked his way across the muddy ground toward me. He wanted to talk privately. I told my foreman to take 15 and led my brother to the site trailer. He looked around the cramped space with barely concealed disdain, the same expression he'd had since I started this business. He said I'd made my point. Everyone understood I was upset. But this scorched earth approach wasn't helping anyone. We needed to find a solution. I asked him what solution he had in mind. He suggested we set up a payment plan. He'd contribute monthly toward the mortgage, a reasonable amount that wouldn't strain his budget. Maybe $200 or $300. Between him and our sister's husband, once he was working again, they could probably cover half. I stared at him. The mortgage payment was $4,200 a month. He was offering $300. I told him that wasn't a solution. That was a symbolic gesture that would still leave me covering 90% of the costs while taking none of the credit or appreciation. He said I was being stubborn. $300 was better than nothing. Besides, I was the one who took out the loans without discussing it with everyone first. That was on me. Something cold settled in my stomach. I asked him to repeat that. He doubled down. I should have called a family meeting before taking on that kind of debt. Instead, I'd made unilateral decisions and now expected everyone else to bail me out. That wasn't fair or reasonable. I pulled up my email on my phone and showed him the message I'd sent 4 years ago. The one where I'd explicitly laid out Mom's renovation requests and the estimated costs. The one where I'd asked if we should all contribute or find alternative solutions. His response, sent from his iPhone while he was apparently in an airport lounge, had been brief. You're closer to the situation. Use your best judgment. I trust you to handle it. He barely glanced at the screen. He said that was different. He'd thought I meant small repairs, not major loans. The renovation estimate in that email had been clearly marked at $75,000. I told him to get out of my trailer. We were done talking. He tried to argue, but I was already opening the door. My foreman and half the crew were within earshot, and my brother was smart enough to recognize he'd lost the audience. He left with a final warning that I was making a huge mistake and would regret this. That afternoon, my sister came by my apartment. She was crying before I even opened the door fully. She said she felt terrible. She genuinely hadn't known how bad things were. She wanted to help, but money was tight with the baby coming. I let her in and made tea while she composed herself. When she'd calmed down, I asked her a simple question. Did she remember what Dad used to say about family? She quoted it immediately. Family takes care of family. No questions asked. I nodded. Dad had lived that principle. When her first husband left her with nothing, Dad had paid her rent for 6 months until she got back on her feet. When my brother's startup failed in his 20s, Dad had covered his living expenses for a year. When I wanted to start my construction company, Dad had co-signed my first business loan even though he was already sick. Family takes care of family. But somewhere after Dad died, that principle became one-directional. It meant I took care of everyone else. When I needed help, needed support, needed even just acknowledgement of what I was carrying, I got lectures about responsibility and embarrassing the family. My sister cried harder. She said she didn't realize. She thought I was doing fine. I never complained. I told her I'd complained plenty. She just hadn't been listening. She asked what I wanted from her. She couldn't afford to help with the mortgage, but maybe she could do something else. I told her I didn't want anything from her except honesty. If she couldn't afford to help, that was fine. But she needed to stop acting like my construction business was something to be ashamed of. It had kept the family afloat for 4 years. That deserved respect, not contempt. She promised she would. Then she asked the question they were all probably wondering. Was I really going to let Mom lose the house? I said that was up to Mom and the rest of the family. I'd given them all the information. They could sell the house, refinance in someone else's name, or start making the payments. Those were all viable options that didn't require me to continue sacrificing my financial future. What I wouldn't do was keep enabling their delusion that everything was fine while they treated me like a failure. She left looking thoughtful, but still worried. Update 2. 2 weeks later, Mom called and asked to meet for coffee. Just the two of us. Her voice sounded smaller than I'd ever heard it, and despite everything, it tugged at something in my chest. We met at a diner near her house, the same place Dad used to take us for pancakes on Sunday mornings. She looked older than I remembered, more fragile. The guilt tried to creep in, but I pushed it back. Guilt was what had gotten me into this mess. She started by apologizing. She said she'd spent the past 2 weeks going through all the documents I'd left, really reading them this time. She hadn't realized how much I'd been covering. She genuinely thought I was doing well, that the money came easily. I asked her how she could think that. I told her multiple times that things were tight. She admitted she hadn't wanted to hear it. After Dad died, she'd been so lost. The house was the only thing that still felt like him. Every time something needed fixing or updating, it felt like maintaining his memory. She'd convinced herself that if I said yes to helping, it meant I could afford it. She'd also been proud of my brother for so long that it became habit. He'd always been the easy one. Good grades, good schools, good job. I'd been the one who struggled in school, who took longer to find my path. When I'd chosen construction, she'd seen it as settling for less than I could be. But she'd read my emails now. The ones where I'd asked for help and got dismissed. The ones where I tried to set boundaries and got guilt. She saw it clearly now, how the family had leaned on me until I'd nearly broken. I told her I appreciated the apology, but I needed to know what happened next. The mortgage payment was due in 5 days. She said she'd made some decisions. First, she was putting the house on the market. It was too big for her anyway, and she'd been rattling around in it alone for too long. She'd already talked to a realtor friend who thought they could list it quickly. Second, she'd called my brother and told him she expected him to contribute to her living expenses going forward. No more free passes because he was busy or important. He'd agreed, though apparently not happily. Third, she wanted to make amends with me. Not just with words, but with action. She'd opened a savings account and started transferring her pension money into it with instructions that it was for me, repayment for everything I'd covered. It wouldn't be immediate and it wouldn't be the full amount, but it was something. I sat back in the booth, genuinely surprised. I'd expected more resistance, more guilt trips, more attempts to preserve the status quo. I asked her what changed her mind. She said my sister had come over and told her what I'd said. About Dad's principle of family taking care of family, and how it had become one-directional. That had hit her hard because she realized I was right. She'd been so focused on her grief and her needs that she'd stopped seeing me as a person with my own struggles. Also, she'd gone to her book club meeting and actually listened to what people were saying. Half of them had children in trades, electricians, plumbers, contractors. They bragged about their kids' success, their work ethic, their growing businesses. She'd realized that her embarrassment about my career was her issue, not reality. One of her friends had pointed out that anyone could wear a suit to an office. It took real skill to build something with your hands that would last for generations. I felt my throat tighten. Dad used to say almost the exact same thing. Mom reached across the table and took my hand. She said she'd failed me as a mother these past few years. She'd been so caught up in her own pain that she'd made me carry everyone else's too. She was sorry, and she understood if I needed time to forgive her. I told her I wasn't angry anymore, just tired, and I needed her to understand that this wasn't about the money. It was about being seen, being valued, being treated like my contributions mattered instead of being expected while simultaneously being looked down on. She said she understood that now. She'd do better. We finished our coffee, and she asked if I'd help her pack up the house when it sold. Not the physical moving, she'd hire movers, but the emotional work of deciding what to keep, what to sell, what to let go of. I agreed. That felt like something I could do. As we left the diner, she mentioned that my brother had called her 3 times trying to talk her out of selling. He thought she was being rash, making emotional decisions. He'd even suggested she just wait a few months for things to cool down. I asked what she told him. She smiled. A real smile, the first I'd seen from her in years. She told him that she'd spent 4 years making emotional decisions that hurt her youngest son. She was done with that. From now on, she'd be making practical decisions that were fair to everyone. He apparently hadn't had a response to that. Update 3. The house sold in 3 weeks. Mom got a good price, enough to pay off all the loans I'd taken out, and still have a substantial amount left for her own retirement. She moved into a small condo in a senior community that she actually seemed excited about. Said it was nice not having to worry about yard work or repairs. My brother contributed to her monthly expenses as promised, though I heard through my sister that he complained about it constantly. Apparently, his wife wasn't happy about the sudden budget adjustment. My sister's husband found a job. It paid less than his previous one, but he was working again, which eased some of their stress. My sister made a point of texting me regularly now, just checking in. Not asking for anything, just maintaining contact. It felt genuine. The real surprise came 2 months after everything blew up. I got a call from an older contractor I'd worked with early in my career. He was retiring and wanted to know if I'd be interested in buying his business and merging it with mine. It was a big opportunity. His client list was extensive and his reputation was solid. It was also expensive, the kind of investment that would require business loans and financial scrutiny. For the first time in 4 years, my finances were actually in order. No hidden family obligations. No unexpected expenses draining my accounts. When the bank reviewed my application, they saw a profitable small business with room for growth, not a financial mess covering up family debt. The loan got approved. I bought him out and merged the companies. Within 6 months, I doubled my crew size and landed 2 commercial contracts that would keep us busy for the next 2 years. I called Mom to tell her the news. She cried and said Dad would be so proud. Then she asked if I'd come to dinner that Sunday. Just her and me, at her new place. She wanted to cook for me the way she used to before everything got complicated. I said yes. At dinner, she told me she'd been talking to a therapist, working through her grief about Dad and her guilt about how she'd treated me. She was learning to recognize when she was using grief as an excuse to avoid accountability. I told her I was proud of her for doing that work. She asked if we were okay now, if I'd forgiven her. I thought about it carefully before answering. I told her forgiveness wasn't a destination, it was a process. What mattered was that she'd acknowledged the harm, made changes, and was actively working to do better. That was more than a lot of people ever did. We were building something new. It wasn't the same as before, but maybe that was okay. Maybe it could be better. She seemed satisfied with that answer. My brother and I still don't talk much. He sent an email a few months ago congratulating me on the business expansion. It was cordial but distant. I responded with equal politeness. Maybe someday we'd rebuild that relationship. Or maybe we wouldn't. I'd made peace with either outcome. The most unexpected change was how I felt about myself. For years, I'd internalized their judgment. Wondered if maybe they were right and I was just being stubborn about my career choice. Questioned whether I should have tried harder to fit into their definition of success. Now I looked at what I'd built. Literally built, with my hands and my mind and my determination, and felt proud. I employed 15 people. I created things that would stand for decades. I'd honored my father's legacy while building my own. And I'd learned the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for family is to stop enabling them. To force them to face reality even when it's painful. To value yourself enough to demand better treatment. That dinner 4 months ago had changed everything. Not because I'd dropped some dramatic truth bomb, but because I'd finally stopped carrying weight that wasn't mine to carry. The family had fallen apart for a while. But the pieces that mattered were slowly coming back together, stronger and more honest than before. And I'd stopped embarrassing the family with my construction business. Not because I'd changed careers, but because they'd finally opened their eyes and saw what I'd been building all along.